Yeah, so so UEN, would this be applicable to them as well for updates on materials? Or is this, I guess I'm just wondering if it's LEA specific. So, okay.
Probably only if UEN is facilitating the contract.
Okay. Yep, that was my question. Thank you.
Board Member Wood had a question?
I just wanted to confirm, so the use of sensitive materials, is that the same that we've been using in the new with the Ivory bill from last year?
It'll be a lot cleaner.
Any new definitions?
I have to think for a second. I wanted to just make sure that live presentations, databases, database software, things like that are also not excluded, right? Because I think the sensitive material talks about books and classroom materials and so forth. I want to make sure as well that things that are being used are appropriate for the standards that you create. So there may be a few other additions just to make sure that they're not excluded.
Thank you.
Questions? Okay, thank you. Back to Representative Ballard.
Great. I love the speed. This is the way I work. Okay. HB 190, Local Education Agency Salary and Personnel Amendments. I really want your input on this. There are some school districts who hire specialists, speech pathologists, psychologists that have a master's degree, but they're only paying them on a bachelor level of teachers. So this is for, according to education, that at a minimum of, that they would have to be at least on parity with the education that you are paying your teachers at. You are welcome to adjust up and down and so forth, but not to pay less than. I think is appropriate for those that come in. I know of somebody who looked at many districts as a speech pathologist, and they chose a charter school because they were actually paying on parity, and yet all these openings were available. So I would like your input. It's like $17 million. And the other part of it is adding psychologists to the Grow Your Own program. And I want your input, because I know this is usually a local LEA issue, right? But this would end up being part of the WPU. I put it off for a year, so there's time to work it out. So if you said, you know what, we don't want this, could I take it out and just have the Grow Your Own? Yeah, but I think it's time for LEAs to start being on parity for specialists. So I'm here to ask your input on that bill. We don't have a lot of time, so I kind of need yes, no suggestions, your input on this bill.
A few lights on. I'll start over here. Okay, is that Member Lear?
I think it's Norton.
Or Norton?
It is me.
There you go. Okay, and then Member Reel.
No.
Norris? Okay.
Just quickly, I am never a fan, if you're asking, truly, sincerely asking for feedback, I am never a fan, and as a board member, I don't want to say always, it's not a good lawyerly word, but I usually vote against anything that tells LEAs how to set their salary schedules.
Okay.
I think that that's their own business. They have to use their money. The money comes through the legislature to the state board, but I just think it's not the business of policymakers to tell LEAs to manage their employee salary schedules or failure.
One over here.
I am a big fan of the Grow Your Own program, and I think schools are in desperate need for more psychologists, and this seems like the perfect place because we have wonderful counselors, and I think that seems to be such a smooth transition. So thank you.
Okay, one over here.
Hymas? Oh, go ahead, Representative Ballard. I think we have Member Hymas. Well,
I just, similar to Member Lear's comments, I don't know have we ever told our LEAs what they have to pay a teacher or pay an employee? Yeah, I worry about that. I do agree that they should be paid their worth and their value, but for me as a board member to go in and say you must is difficult.
You got it over here. All right, I'm keeping track here. Anybody else?
Mr. Hart.
So I love Grow Your Own. I think it was a business case I was pushing for in the past. I would actually like to see Grow Your Own be for anything the district decides is their need. And it's a.
How does that change my fiscal notes? to not know what it's going to.
Right, I know. But what I'm saying is to make more categories is not, in my view, this is my as a board member view, you can make as many categories as you want, and I would be thrilled, because that means the LEA can figure out where their needs are.
Okay.
Anybody else? Board members? Okay, I think back to Representative. Am I missing one? Member Boggins. Okay, sorry.
It's all good.
There you go.
Thank you. Hi, Representative Ballard. Thanks for being here. I have a question here on line 168. You're citing school psychologist means an individual whom the state board licenses to practice as a school psychologist. And I'm concerned about that language, because I think we have a lot of psychology going on in our schools by unlicensed people. Mm-hmm. And I think that, and I guess maybe I have a question. Is this person, according to this language, going to be required to have other licenses? Because that language causes me great consternation. And then I would definitely go and agree with Member Hymas and Member Lear. I don't like telling our LEAs what to pay for different positions, but that would be my primary question right there.
Okay, so here's my result. I'm going to take out the pay parity. I'm going to keep the grow your own. And I think that is put in there because if it is going to grow your own, then they do, and and psychologists by nature have their degree and certified. Is that right?
So technically, yes, but as this language reads, the state board could license someone as a school psychologist without another agency credential. That's what I'm seeing there.
Okay, just for time's sake, I'm going to say I'm open for language. Okay, including if you wanted to open that up, open that scope. I'm here to make public education better. Okay, so I'm good for that. All right, anything else? We good to move on?
The questions, Board Member Reel?
Okay.
Did you have? No?
Okay, come up, give me some suggested language. Okay. Great. I'm happy with that. All right, HB 87 Youth Sports Safety Amendments. This has been really interesting because there's so much support for this, not just in schools, but in the public, and not just for concussion, cardiac arrest, and also for heat stroke, those three. So we're working with a number of groups, including UHSSA, to determine, is this better in a resolution that really goes out to everybody and let you guys manage it? Is it better to keep it in this bill? We're working on that. Not sure where it's going to end up. But I think it's already there, since they're already doing concussion protocol. This is, in my mind, not a big deal to just add those two things, because that's part of coaching and being responsible for the health of your athletes. So we'll see where it goes.
Okay, any Board Vice Chair Earl?
I just have a quick question. Would this include community coaches or just at the LEA?
So it erroneously was put into the board. It was supposed to be in the Department of Health section where concussion already exists. So that's what I'm talking about. I'm not keeping it over here with you. It would be in DHS that does also include, I always have to think of the acronym, UHSSA, to do. So that's where it would be if this moves forward in code, otherwise the resolution. But that's where it should be, because that's where they're already doing all this concussion protocol anyway. It just makes sense to be there.
Is it Member Lear? Okay.
To come and so frankly ask, what is the fiscal note on this? Because there are a number of assignments, and it's
the fiscal note right now is for the board, so that's one reason why it would not be your fiscal note. And that's what I'm also working on and simplifying, because DHS already has to have a protocol for concussion with committees that determine the information and so forth. I want it as simple and straightforward as possible.
But I want the cost covered too.
Right. Well, but it wouldn't be yours. So that answers that.
And I guess I'm being a little protective of LEAs and saying I think their costs should be covered in an appropriation.
Yeah, because I think with the LEAs, they already have training for concussion and for other things for the coaches, and so it's adding one more piece of information.
And another training video and another time period.
And it would be, once you're certified, you can just review it yearly, so it's not that rigorous every year having to go through that process. So again, I'm all about simplicity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Member Straight?
Yeah, there was this, my drafter is amazing, but there's this little thing called this Utah Fits All bill. That took a lot of time, and so the drafters are really backed up. So anyway.
Member Straight, then Member Wood, then Member Bogus, I think.
Yes, I know that at the school I taught, we actually had the DFib machines, and everyone on staff did have that available.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As a former coach, not everyone falls under high school activities. Your junior highs, if you're a ninth grader and participating with the high school, you do fall under high school activities. But if you're a ninth grader and you play at the junior high, that's outside. So I think those kids need to be covered too.
I have a great idea. You have rule-making authority.
That's the administrator.
Member Wood and Member Bogus. Oh, was that you? Not Wood? Sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
There we go. Do you know if this is under the National Federation for High School, if they have this in their trainings already?
That's a good question. I will ask.
Okay. I know a lot of times the local schools will use the NFHS as part of their training, so if we can somehow get them on board, that would alleviate a lot of this stuff, and
Okay.
I'm sure it's a nationwide concern.
And I'm going to write down that acronym.
I know. I don't
Okay,
want to have
acronym is?
NFHS, National Federation for High School Sports.
Okay. Great. Any other feedback?
Member Bogus.
I can answer Member Hymas's question. It absolutely is. I've taken it about 14 times.
Okay, there you go.
So the answer to that question is yes. My question actually relates to whether or not it's appropriate to codify this. And I'm asking because most states don't codify this stuff. They put it under their activities association. And then when it needs to change and actively morph and be organic in real time, then we don't have to go back to the legislature for changes in how we operate. And so I'm asking, is it appropriate to put this in code, or would it be more appropriate to direct the association to manage it so that it can be more organic?
That's why we're working on that, and that's why simplicity for me, I didn't even want those definitions in there. I want whatever committee or group is already filtering and sending that information, because medicine's practicing, and so it is going to change. So I don't want that in code. So if that helps that, and whether this should be in code, that's what we're working out with community sports and high school to say, because a resolution's a resolution, but if they're going to do something with my resolution, if I turn it to a resolution, is it just going to be out there and not do anything? I want to know if the High School Sports Association, as well as the community and municipalities, if they're actually going to send out the resolution, that matters to me, or what they're going to do. So we're working on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Other questions? Okay.
Okay. Let's see. I'm so fortunate to have an intern who's keeping me posted on where I am in the other room. Okay. HB 136, Safe School Route Evaluations. Right now, you already have school committees that work on safe routes. They already have to, and again, this also has a sub, they already have to report to UDOT what those safe route recommendations are if there's changes. I'm going to keep in that language that they still report to UDOT. That's in code. And then I'm going to ask UDOT to share it with you here. But the the most important part of this is that the municipality who owns the road and is responsible, they actually have to respond in 30 days. This has support from the League of Cities and Towns. I think they're also double checking it on Monday because there are some of the municipalities that don't communicate with your transportation committees that determine safe routes. So this is fair, that it's really a communication facilitator for that committee that works so hard for safe routes, that the municipality has to respond within 30 days. And UDOT worked with me on this language. They want these municipalities to actually apply for their safe school route funding, that they have to help get those changes done. I'll tell you why this is important. One of my cities, Senator Todd Weiler's area, Woods Cross, the route that has been chosen, that's the walking route, not busing, but walking route, the children have to pass a refinery, go over train tracks, go under I-15, cross Highway 89. And so the other component of this is, should that safe route transportation committee consider a bus route? Or a different walking route that doesn't include all of those four things, right? And then if they measure it and say, this is the safe route that we've determined, then we want a bus. There's no requirement for a bus. There's no requirement that the cities have to change their sidewalks and roads. This is a facilitator of communication of what the needs are and asking UDOT and putting into UDOT a request to help fund it. So I think that's why I've got great support from school districts and municipalities, as long as they know the actual language of the bill. Okay,
All
any
right,
questions?
Member Rio and Member Bogus, I believe.
I think that anything that we can do to push our municipalities to better walkable communities is so important. And I represent much of the west side of Salt Lake and West Valley and downtown, and this is extremely important. And I know the city of Salt Lake is pushing for more walkable and safer walking routes for our students. So thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Member Bogus and Member Davis.
Thank you. I'm asking you a lot of questions today, Representative Ballard. What is the time allocation, if you will, or the burden on our LEAs for this? Because I'm reading some language in here, and I know being in that environment every day that they're spent. So if you could give me, how many hours per year, how many hours per week, and when I say ballpark nobody in here is probably going to come back and freak out over that. I'm just wondering if you could ballpark the burden on our LEAs.
It won't change anything, because they're already required by law to submit their safe route to UDOT.
So then what does this do if it doesn't change anything?
It changes the municipality responding to your recommendations and submitting to UDOT application for help to funding if they choose to do those routes.
So this changes the burden
on the municipalities.
Okay. That's
who are responsible for the roads.
Maybe I missed that before. Thank you.
Yeah.
Davis?
I think I missed that as well. That was really helpful. Thank you. I just was going to say I don't think this is a hard thing necessarily to do. We did this 15 years ago when I was principal at my school, and we did the studies and did our safety, and we worked with the city to apply for this grant, and we had sidewalks and safety things put into place so our kids could get to school safely. So I think a lot of schools and cities are already working together. So if you are telling us this requires not one extra thing for a school or principal or anybody to do, it only requires a municipality to apply for a grant, not a school, then
and respond to the need.
That helps a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
Member Wood and Vice Chair Hart.
Wondering what the requirements are regarding safe walking routes in our charter schools, because if you look at line 144, it's very specific to elementary, middle, and junior high within the district, and it doesn't use our terminology of LEA that we usually use when we're talking about either a school or a traditional.
If you have that recommendation to change in code, Angie knows how to get a hold of me.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
That's why we're here. Okay.
That's your heart.
Yeah, as someone who did their safe walking routes with their school community council last night, there's a lot of parent input, and when you authentically go to get that parent input and then there's not really a response, it's a dead end for parents, and I just love that there's follow through. I'm excited about this.
Okay, any further questions on that one? Dr. Earl?
Yes, I guess I'm trying to understand the charter element. That you're going to have to maybe reach out to because
you figure it out. Let me know.
Okay, perfect.
I think you guys can do it.
Just because
I have to go. I have one more bill left, and then you can talk about it, and you can let me know if you have any input. Okay. HB 229, teacher parental leave and postpartum recovery leave. I also believe this has a sub. This is what is so great about this. The requirement for parity, and then we have to change it in the code because, again, it didn't end up where I wanted it. Whatever is in state code for postpartum leave is what is at a minimum required for staff and teachers for postpartum leave. My favorite part of this, and so when it changes in code, I don't have to keep coming back and change it in your code, right? It's just going to parallel that. My favorite part of this is I'm adding that vacation and sick days can be shared within an individual school among staff and teachers. Because that means, and not just for postpartum leave, but for other medical or necessitated things. And I know that some districts are like, oh, we don't know how to do that. Guess what? There are some with best practices that are already doing this. The reason why I really like this is I think within an individual school, when an administrator, which I know of one, has lots of vacation days and has a teacher that has been in a car accident and wants to retain that teacher, these kinds of funds of sharing and having a pool within they want to take care of each other. Let's let them take care of each other, and the schools can figure out how they want to manage those donated funds. It's not a day necessarily because everybody's paid differently, but those funds. And I hope that this providing this sharing will be new for many schools, but I think knowing that they can take care of their own will help retention substantially, because I know staff, teachers, administrators that are begging to be able to help retain their comrades that are at the schools. So I've got to go. If you have any input, you can let me know.
We will send it along.
Thank you.
You so much, Representative Ballard, for joining us. Okay. And board members Carey and Davis were on deck, so let's funnel that through our staff onto the sponsor. Is it?
Oh, okay.
Is that you? Sorry.
We'll
These lights don't necessarily match the chairs. You probably noticed I'm stumbling a bit. So, sorry.
I was just going to say something.
Yeah, let's just make sure we funnel that through Angie.
So my question, do you want it to go through Angie or just right now?
Yeah, we have a second now. Let's put it on the record.
My question would be could this be viewed as an attempt to nullify the negotiated agreement within districts? Because they work hard on those, and that language is included in some of those. Some it's not allowed, and it has to do with budgetary things, and it can be vast and broad and very complex. And so that would be my first question. And then my second question would be, would it be more appropriate to allow it? Because this seems to demand it. And I would like to ensure that our LEAs have as much autonomy as possible to engage in that process the way that works for their community.
You want me to respond, or just?
Yeah, go ahead, if you have a response.
So it looks like the 3 weeks is required, and then it's beginning July 1, 2026. So if an LEA's agreement, they would need to take that into consideration for the 26-27 school year. So it wouldn't change necessarily an agreement that's in there today. And I'm just reading. It does say shall develop leave policies, shall. So they are required. It's not may. and honestly, they could do that without the bill if it was a may, if that makes sense. they probably have the authority currently to do that. So it is shall not may.
Okay. Member Davis, did you want to bring yours up, or?
Yeah, I just have a question. Do we have any data on who can't do the sharing of the days? I mean, people are already doing this. And I know we are in our area. If there's we had a teacher whose child had 2 months to live, and everybody in the school donated all their days to that teacher to spend those last 2 months with their daughter. So I'd like to see some data about, who's not allowing that to happen. I don't think we need code if we have a widespread problem, but if everybody's refusing to do something great like that, then maybe that's another story. Just don't want to make new rules for new rules.
Yeah, and I guess the comment I would just make is that's probably a better question for, that's why I keep looking over there, for our district friends to see if they have any data on that, because my guess is otherwise we'd have to send out some sort of survey to ask that. Yeah.
No surveys. Yeah. Maybe the sponsor will just get some anecdotal data or something.
Chair, may I?
Yes, please.
Could we just ask, I would bet you at least 2 cents that the UEA has that data. And I bet they could just email it across, and so we could ask them for that data.
Okay. Anything further? I do have a light, Member Lear.
Other things. I would ask Representative Ballard, this is just me, this is going to cost money to LEAs. Some LEAs are probably doing this or not doing this with the money they have. I would much prefer this to be a grant program or something that made LEAs whole if it's going to be mandated from the state level. Otherwise, it breaks my heart, but I couldn't support this any more than the earlier employment issue.
And I'll just add, I think the data request would include whatever policies might be inhibiting districts from doing that. Is that already part of what's in the hopper? Or are we just asking for data on whether it's being done?
Well,
it might be helpful to know if there are policy barriers in the way now that this bill would, eliminate.
And Chair, I just wanted to clarify too, so I know right now board members are asking questions. Later on in the agenda is when you'll actually take the official motions to maybe say, we support, we oppose, we request this amendment, or we request this information. I guess in this space, I'm just wondering, are you wanting that on behalf of the board to officially request this information, or should I just share a couple of board members ask these things? If you have responses, let me know. Do you see the difference?
Yeah, I don't know if this one's coming up this afternoon, in an hour, in the next hour, so we might have a little bit of time to put out whatever questions
I don't know if any of them
we can ask and then bring them back.
And Board Member Lear, you were referring to this leave policy bill when you said there's no money. I want money related to it, right? Okay. And then data. Okay.
Okay, anything further? Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Stallings. I think next item up is our discussion of budget priorities with Deputy Superintendent Jones.
Okay. So let's see. What we're going to, Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones. Is an integral part of the budget process. Staff do our best to ensure that you as the board are kept up to date on any kind of developing situation that affects the budget as a whole, the public education budget and or the state budget. We have a developing situation where legislative leadership has asked us for the board's input and basically position on what amounts to a structural imbalance between the general fund and the education fund, which is now called the income tax fund. Sorry, I used the old title. I'll do better on that with the ITF. I did ask Civil to post a particular presentation to get you up to speed on this situation and this discussion item so that you as the board are informed as it develops, because there could actually be a bill released today that talks about a framework to basically structure public education funding for the future. Let's see. We pull up. Okay. I can probably do it. Do you all have that? Can you see the presentation? Can the board members see it or no? Okay.
Put up on a screen.
This one. I'm on my laptop. What? Oh, okay. How do I make it bigger? There it is. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So what we've done is prepared a presentation, keeping in mind this is just a discussion item, so we're not looking for any action today. But at some point, as staff, we do request that the board meet, or as part of your upcoming meetings, address this situation. There's the public education earmark discussion background is as follows. I can go to the next slide. How do I advance this? Okay. Let me give you the background on this. Okay, I got it. Yep. So here's the background. As I said earlier, Utah legislative leadership has convened education stakeholders. So UEA, JLC, USBA, USSA, they're very interested in ensuring that they're involving stakeholders in this situation, which is a goal to address the imbalance between the sales tax and income tax and projected future state expenditure needs. As you know, just real quickly, the sales tax is a primary revenue source to the general fund, and then the income tax is a primary revenue source into the income tax fund. The proposed solution from the legislature, not from your staff, is to remove the education earmark from Article 13 of the Constitution while adding language to Article 10 that establishes the state commitment to education funding. As it stands right now, what you see on page number 3 or slide number 3 is a proposal for a repeal of Amendment G and then a replacement of an amendment that has this language. So this language is from the legislative legal team and goes and says, subject to revenue growth, the legislature shall establish a statutory public education funding framework. What I'm asking for, again, is for the board in the near term, subsequent meetings or maybe a special finance committee meeting to help us as staff know what your direction is to make sure that the legislature and legislative leadership are aware of where you stand on this particular situation or this position to that. So this can be amended by you or, some other proposal on constitutional language. I just had to put it in here as a starting point. This is where we're at as far as what's been given to us by legislative leadership and their guidance that, Amendment G basically has to be repealed, Article 13 and then Article 10, this type of amendment would be part of Article 10. And subject to whatever you determine you want us as staff to present to the legislature, that's your position. I do want to start out with, so I'm going to go down here. I do want to start out with this chart. Again, we put this in your backup, so hopefully you had a chance to see it. But what I want to do is orient you to the chart as an important segue into your decision-making process in your upcoming or subsequent meetings. The gray areas or the gray bars indicate particular times in our history or the economy, if you will, where we hit what's called a recessionary period. What I've proposed or what I'm proposing to you is that somehow we see if we can get some type of constitutional amendment or protection. So I'll use these 3 words: support, defend, and protect. And when I use those words, I don't mean defend and protect against the legislature or anything else. What I'm asking for is to see if we can come to terms with the legislature on both Constitution and bill in a bill file, with specific language, and I'll get to that here in a second, that really supports, protects, and defends public education funding in exchange for what the purpose or intent is of the situation we're in right now, which is to basically make the income tax fund accessible to more than just what is currently in Amendment G. As you can see on this chart here, or I want to call your attention specifically to that time period that we're all familiar with, which was 2007, 2008. You see the blue line that represents public education funding, and I want to be very clear about this. This only represents state funding. We backed out federal funding. We backed out transfers, federal funding, federal mineral lease, I believe. We really were trying to just focus on the state portion of funding here to demonstrate to you that you see that precipitous drop that occurred in 07, 08, and then subsequently led to a 2010 13% decline in appropriation for public education. What's the so what of that? Well, the so what of that is even back then, as all of you know as well, the income tax fund, which was back then the education fund, was only accessible to public ed and higher ed, right? And there, you still saw that significant decline. Since then, the legislature surely did. They've learned their lesson. But you can see as you track the blue line, we've simply not recovered from that, right? So again, along the lines of those three words, support, protect, and defend, what we're proposing to you as a decision-making body for a position on this situation is along that line of how can we protect against a similar circumstance, such as a recession and the subsequent decline, if you will, in public education funding. And all the time now that it's taken, no one's going to argue that the legislature hasn't focused on public ed and increased incrementally, the WPU, and yes, there's line items, and not getting into a debate about which is better, all the money in the WPU or what have you. But you can see just how much effort it takes to get back to where we were before. So what we all want to do now is we want to make sure that we don't ever, there's no silver bullet, there's no 100% thing, but we want to try to make sure that we're in a position where we don't experience what we did in 07, 08 in the sense of losing so much public education funding. So let me go back up to the top. Here are some potential approaches to develop the framework if we proceed along that line. Any of these ideas, if you will, could be modified to become constitutional language. We've met with leadership, and when I mean leadership, I mean specifically Senator Milner and Representative Schultz. Chair Moss has been there, so he can add some additional insight to this. I do believe that there's still room for us to make recommendations, or the board to take a position on what you would like to see in the language of the Constitution. So the juice is worth the squeeze. However, there's no guarantees, right? There's no guarantees that they will, put language in the Constitution. The other piece of this is, I'm not sure, I can't remember if I said this earlier, but there is a potential that the bill file could be opened as early as today, and that's why we wanted to make sure we got this in front of you, at least today, so you to all intents and purposes, you don't feel sideswiped or that just has been brought to us here recently as well about the timing of this. So we're on a tight timeline. I mean, we basically only have the weeks that are left in the legislative session to do this. So that's why I'm encouraging that the board address this in upcoming meetings and even consider having, maybe a special finance committee meeting so that they can make recommendations to you on your Thursday meeting. Anyway, these are just ideas that we as staff have developed initially for you to consider either, again, modifying and trying to find some, language that you all agree to or that a majority of you agree to propose to the legislature to go into the Constitution and or be part of the bill, right? That as the bill comes out, we can, work with them. Angie's quick to make modifications, amendments. You know how that process works. All of these have supporting analytics, formulas. You know, we'd be able to provide those to you as backup should you choose to move forward with this in the recommended manner that I have offered to you today. But here, just real quickly, let me just walk you through these. 1 and 2 are mutually supportive of one another. That at the very least, if it ends up being that we can't get particulars into the Constitution language, that 1 and 2 could be put into the bill or as code as making sure that fund public education utilizing the funding level base from the prior fiscal year before increases or decreases are made to any other subcommittee's budget. So then, number 2, the statute codifies that the legislature shall prioritize public education funding in times of economic growth and make the public education budget the last budget to decrease during times of economic recession or stagnation. What that does is it promotes the protect and defend aspect of it. Does it necessarily mean that you wouldn't see a precipitous drop? No. But what it does is it establishes an agreement that public education is the first budget to receive attention when, you know, we have high periods of economic growth, to fund it to the maximum capability that they can, and that should we hit a recessionary period or an economic decline, that it's the last budget that they would cut. Number 3 is a proposal that has been batted around actually for years about how the WP value could be brought up to more of a level consistent with growth on this too. So right now the WP value based on the base budget, because the final budget hasn't been passed, is $4,175. If we were to try to get to $6,000 by a certain time, it would literally take 10% per year for the next 4 years in order to get to $6,000. This particular item right here doesn't have very much traction with the legislative leadership to it. Doesn't mean they still won't consider it, but it was pretty much told to me that that would be a very difficult thing for the legislature to even consider. 4, here again, what we're trying to do is take as much advantage of the situation we can in the interest of public education to get us to a higher level, maybe a percentile or thing. Again, any of these can be modified. This is not something that we're saying has to happen to it, but we had to start somewhere. So, you by way of finance committee, or if you want to do it in the main board meeting next week, you could consider this as well. Number 5, the statute codifies that the legislature shall set aside sufficient funds per year to ensure sustainment of public education. Protect and defend, right? We want to protect and defend against what we experienced in 2008, which had negative consequences, and we just simply haven't recovered. We have seen increases, to the level of funding before, but if we had a contingency fund or a rainy day fund specific to public education, and we do have that, but that it be clearly stated that we want something that can absorb the shock of something like happened in 2008 so that we can do this. So, that's just another idea or proposal. Because you can see at each one of these, at the end of each one of these numbers, we say and or, right? We're not saying absolutely do this, try this, but again, we have to start somewhere. 3 more ideas or proposals to develop the framework and or could be modified to move up into the constitutional aspects of the language. We can make whatever proposal or direction you want to take as the board. Number 6 was probably the closest we could get to something that could be moved up into the Constitution or the constitutional language. So if I could just pause right there and draw your attention to this fund, you can see that over time, the legislature or the appropriation of state money that's gone into public education has been closely at around 50%, right? Now, if we were to add back in federal money, then you would see that you would hear those things about, the overall state education budget is 53% or 51%, things like that. But again, we wanted to make sure we compared apples to apples and just looked at state money, right? State appropriations. So that's why you see this trend line here as being close to that too. And then if you go back to the original slide, or the slide that I showed you, the chart, you can see too that during those times of decline, if there was something like that, as a safeguard to this, then we might be able to absorb the shock much better and protect and defend public education funding against economic decline. So back to the ideas. There's 7 and 8 for your review. Again, we have all the formulas or calculations that we did to promote these ideas, so we can back them up at a future date with you. But then, 1 through 8, you as board members, please make suggestions. More ideas are better for us. But we would like to know your position as soon as possible because, again, we're on a tight timeline. Sir, subject to any questions or concerns, that concludes my briefing and on this discussion item.
Very much, Deputy Jones. I think we have Member August here with lights on. Sorry.
For this, I appreciate it a lot. I just have a couple questions, and maybe it's a clarification of my understanding. So you talked about the rainy day fund, and if I recall the document that was in the last board meeting correct, it had green on one side, blue on the other.
Right. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so my understanding is they're taking 100% of that rainy day fund, at least in this budget year, for the teacher raise under the Utah FITS bill. Would that be correct? Or is that incorrect?
I'm not sure if it's correct. They're taking 100% of it. They are using it for that, but 100%. So the teacher raise portion is $200 million, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah. So the fund itself has more than $200 million in it, but they're not allowed to utilize. They still have to keep money in there.
Okay, so it's just this year's allocation they're pulling.
I believe so. Yes.
So they're pulling. It's safe to say they're pulling 100% of this year's allocation. Or is that not a correct understanding either?
I think that's a correct application to this, but I can double check and make sure I verify that with you.
Yeah, I just would like to understand that better. And then I would just offer that I'm a little concerned about the language used here, and not from your point of view. I think you've done a great job working to defend public ed. But now that private ed is publicly funded, the language in here can be subject to a lot of crazy.
Sure.
And so I would say that, we need to be very careful what we put in code, because now all education under the FITS bill is publicly funded and can be called public ed. So if we're looking at that, then we're looking at budget line items that can be tacked on to public ed funding, all under those 2 words of public education. And so I just would caution us that we need to be careful when we use those words, because if this bill is enacted and signed by the governor, then we've got huge issues there.
Yeah, Chair, if I may.
Please.
Yeah, again, and you pointed this out, this is not staff's word or language. It's a starting point that was given to us by legislative leadership that they're looking at. But your concerns are valid, and I think that's why we need the board to address this soon. So that because we know what we know now with HB 215, right? That your concerns are valid concerns, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Member Lear.
Is this the time to give Scott our ideas, or is this the time only to ask questions?
We might ask questions, then turn back to ideas. I did want to see if we had public comment from anybody in our other educational organizations, but perhaps we can finish with questions and turn to public comment, come back.
I don't have
confusing.
questions. I just have some absolutes for me as one board member.
But perhaps we can just see, and I'm not sure if there are anybody in the audience that wanted to share. Lexi Cunningham, USBA, did you want to give us your thoughts, and then we can turn back to recommendations?
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Lexi Cunningham, USSA, USBA. I don't really have thoughts that I'm going to share with you. I just thought it might be helpful for the board to know that we're going to use Deputy Superintendent Jones's slides tomorrow with our school board members, our superintendents, and our business administrators, go through the last couple of meetings that we have had with the earmark committee and try to solicit feedback just like you are doing. So we're actually here hoping to get your feedback first so that we can share it tomorrow. So that's just the process that we'll use with superintendents, board members, and our business administrators. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cunningham. Back to Deputy Jones, I guess, for board member feedback and comment. I'll just add, the two graphs that Deputy Jones showed show two different sources of concern. The first graph that we had up that had the line showing the relationship between education funding and total available revenue shows fair consistency across the last 40 years of just under or above 50%. That came as the effect, if not necessarily the formulaic intent, of being tied to income tax, and that's what we're in danger of being detached from. So one question is, can we protect that relationship that education has had as a proportion of total available revenue? The second one was more cyclical, and that was the the up and down with the economy, and showing the crash in other periods where everything tanked and then came back up, but not enough. So we're looking at both of those, and one thing that we are trying to figure out as we're in these discussions is what kind of protections against either or both of those threats can potentially be put in the Constitution where it's got more stability. And I think what Deputy Jones indicated is that perhaps the opportunity that seems most open is to think about protecting that relationship to total funding as a constitutional proposal. We can propose anything we like, but it seems like that one probably has the best hearing, where some of the other protections might be statute, but we're just sort of conveying what we're hearing. I don't know if I'm getting that completely accurate, Deputy Jones. Yeah. But so there's kind of that ongoing systemic challenge and then the cyclical challenge, and we have an opportunity to try to recommend solutions for both of those. But I think part of what we've gotten is formulaic or numeric protections are difficult in the Constitution if they have some specific value. On the other hand, can we perhaps address that relationship that we've always enjoyed to general funding? So let's turn to some, do we have lights up? Sorry.
Oh, no, I just said.
Oh.
As one board member, these are 5 absolutes for me in terms of what this will look like. First of all, I want specific language in the Constitution. This is general, subject to revenue growth, the legislature salary. That doesn't do it for me. I want 50% of the total budget forever, or something like that, something very specific in the Constitution. And again, maybe these are pie in the sky type things. Secondly, I want to align with USBA. I was actually hoping we would see something from USBA so that we could say what they said. But I think that it's really important that the education community comes together and says this is what we want. Thirdly, I want simple language so it's clear to the voters what they're voting for. I like your number 7, but I don't think those phrases will translate well to the public. And I want it to be really clear. And that's why I threw out, half kiddingly, 50% of the state budget forever, or 60%. Sure. Fourthly, I would like this discussion to be fleshed out in finance. I don't think the purpose of anybody's idea was that it would be decided today, but I think the Finance Committee would be a perfect place to refine the board's proposal. Fifth, I would like to see adequacy language in the constitutional language. It's not any secret, but in states that have successfully pushed their legislature for funding that had been previously low, they all had adequacy language, so we've got some interpretation from the courts, and it's been effective in other states. And I don't, not off the top of my head, enough of a Utah constitutional scholar to know how that blends in with Utah language. But I would like to really, really fight for adequacy language. Thanks.
Other board members, comments and suggestions? Member Norton? Member Straight.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. I think that's a great list, a great place to start. You know, it is a fact that we have a fiscal imbalance. That's fact, and it's going to cause us some difficulties. And education is my number one priority, but the general welfare of the state of Utah is also right there with it. And so the stance I would like to take kind of goes along with this support, protect, defend, is we want to be fair and firm. We want to be fair, recognizing what's going on in our state. There are other needs that need to be met, and we need to have a mechanism to do that. Firm in that we need that specific language in the Constitution. We need that protection. A statute doesn't give me that sense of just calm. I want to be assured of what we have. And you know, I don't want to delve into these different ideas too much, but I would like to take the concept and apply it to number 6. So it was mentioned that this was closest to what could be turned into constitutional language, which is firm. But I think the fair side of the issue maybe doesn't quite match up with 6. However, without trying to put together a plan right now, there are things going on in my mind, and I know there's a lot of people that have brighter minds than I do on how we could make number 6 both fair and firm. And so I think it'd be a bad idea to try and go into those details now, and I do support that this get flushed out in the Finance Committee and that we're able to move on Thursday. I don't know if a motion would be appropriate at this point. No, we're just in discussion, so I'll just pass that. Thank you.
Member Norton.
Yes, this is going to be a question and then, a suggestion, and I think you've seen a lot of my suggestions. But has there been any talk? Do you feel like there's any potential for movement that we can separate public education away from higher ed and away from social services?
No, ma'am. Chair, if I may, no, I haven't. There's been no really discussion about that. I mean, really, and anyone can correct me, what I'm sensing is it's just really about opening access to the income tax fund for everyone, and then some kind of separation like that you're describing would mean, additional discussion and but I think we're in a situation right now because of the imbalance that they need another revenue source, right? And so no, I've not heard anything about that, ma'am.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
through the chair.
Other board members, is this Superintendent Dixon?
Thank you.
I don't think we have Sid yet. Yep. Is that it?
And on, yes.
There we go.
No, you're spot on.
Superintendent, Vice Chair Earl.
I just have a question. Depending on where it's set in Article 10, would that influence public ed versus higher ed? In other words, if they put something in like Section 1 that was specific to public education, I'm just wondering if wherever it's referenced in there, or do you imagine are they talking about adding just another section? And maybe there's no talk on that.
So I'd have to defer to my constitutional law experts on that. I really do think it's just a general, right now they're proposing just a general statement, which would be in Article 10, and not, subdivide like 1, 2, yeah. But I'm sure we can develop that and clarify that as part of this process, ma'am, through the chair.
Member Wood.
Sorry. In the discussions that have been happening, we have multiple bills out there, some removing sales tax from food, some with reducing the actual income tax rate. Are all of those things being discussed in these conversations that, we're trying to open it up and give it to public education, but reduce it at the same time?
Sure. Chair, if I may. Please. We have not gone into that depth level. Again, these are meetings that have recently, and the Chair Moss has been there, have only lasted an hour, right? So and it's just, hey, bring us your ideas, and then we were adamant that, well, our ideas are the board's ideas, right? We can, have a starting point here, but the short answer to that is no, we haven't gone into that depth of detail in any of these meetings, if I understand the question correctly.
Okay, we don't have a ton of time for legislative items, but I'll just comment that we've had a lot of good discussion among our partners in the education community about the necessity of protecting that priority that the state has always given to public ed. And to Member Straight's point of being firm and fair, we recognize that the problem here is a structural imbalance in the tax revenue. And so that leads to the detachment from a particular funding source, but we have to preserve our position because it truly is the engine of everything else. The state needs roads, the state needs social services. We need educated citizens to design and build those roads and provide those social services. So this is truly the foundation. That's been recognized by the legislature and our population over the years. And I think everybody's united in wanting to protect that priority and preference and protection that's been given. So we're grateful, Deputy Jones, for all the efforts in articulating that case. And if there's any other further comment, I think we are looking at that Finance Committee meeting Tuesday. Perhaps we're discussing that, but that seems like the appropriate next step, and then bring it back to the board. So look forward to that discussion, and obviously any member input before that, please send it along. Anything further, Deputy Jones? Sorry.
If I could.
Right. Anybody to Deputy Jones, right?
Yes, please. And I'm sure this meeting is recorded, so we'll capture Board Member Lear, all the input that we've received thus far, and incorporate that into the. If we do have a Finance Committee meeting, we'll track with that as additional ideas or modifications of the current ideas. So, Chair, may I clarify or answer? Okay, so I checked in with Jedi Masters, Hauber and Bills, right, for Board Member Bogus's question, and we don't know yet, ma'am. We don't know for sure where that money is going to come from. If it comes from the Economic Stabilization Account, there's $441 million. I think I sent you an email that tried to clarify this from your last one, but we don't know yet where precisely that money's coming from. We will know more towards the end of the session.
All right, thank you, Deputy Jones.
One last thing, sir, and I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up. There's a vested interest of the legislature to remove the food portion from the sales tax. Okay, I think that's a very important piece here for me to let you know as well. So, I'm not saying they're going to or anything like that, but a lot of this has to do with some of the things that they're trying to do as well, which Board Member Moss covered in the general sense of the tax focus or the tax concerns, but the food tax is definitely a central piece of this process that's going on right now. So that concludes my briefing. Thank you, sir.
We do have one last slide. I don't know if it's a question or a comment. Do we have Member Lear or Member Rio?
Is it time for general questions about other bills or other?
We're going to move to Deputy Stallings for that. So if that concludes Deputy Jones,
That's
thank
what
you,
mine is.
sir.
Thank you, sir. Sorry
Okay.
for too much
Nope.
time.
Thank you. Big stuff, important, very important. So, Deputy Stallings, if we can turn to the review of legislation, we do want to leave time if there are potential motions on particular bills. So,
Okay.
let's see where we get, and maybe around 1:30 or so, we turn to action items.
Perfect. Good afternoon, board members. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. And of course, I've got Greg Cannell here with me, your USBE policy analyst. We'll start working through the bills. The first one on the list is HB 118, false claims amendments. And you may or may not have noticed on Civic Clerk, I also uploaded a 2-page document that provides some background on HB 118 from USBE's perspective. As a reminder, this bill is a refile of a bill that was numbered last year, and it was a request of the state boards last year and again this year. So we asked for this bill. What the bill does, well, first let me just start with the background. This bill request came as a recommendation from the USBE Audit Committee discussions of a number of audits. There's two kind of separate issues being addressed in this bill. One is the enactment of an education false claims part in the code, which essentially provides a mechanism for USBE. And right now it's also extended to other individuals, but I believe that the sponsor may be limiting that to just USBE, or if, in the case of a district or charter school, if they have a contract with a third-party provider and that third-party provider submits false claims for reimbursement, this would be a way of getting recourse or a remedy for that in lieu of having to file a full-blown lawsuit litigation. And this is patterned after or modeled after. There's already a medical false claims act in Utah Code for medical submissions for reimbursement of funds, and also modeled after the federal false claims act. And that this request for an educational false claims act, and it only applies to K-12, by the way. This bill does not apply to higher ed, not that you would necessarily want it to, but I just want to make that clarification because an earlier version of the bill did make it look like it applied to both K-12 and higher ed, but then the substitute limits it to just K-12. But it was related to an audit and may have been related to one of our own contractors and an experience we had where one of our contractors was submitting false claims or claims that were not substantiated. The second part of the bill would provide the rulemaking authority for LEA procurement practices. It would move that from currently there is a policy advisory committee or board that I think the Division of Purchasing staff, but that policy board essentially is made up of procurement professionals or officials in school districts. Our procurement head, director of procurement and contracts, sits on that committee, as well as other procurement professionals throughout the state. That group is right now the rulemaking authority for the procurement practices of many entities, including school districts and charter schools. So essentially the practitioners, or those who the rules apply to, their representatives make the rules, make recommendations for the administrative rules. This bill would make the rulemaking authority, or would transition the rulemaking authority to the State Board of Education in lieu of that other entity. The other last two things the bill does is it would permit an LEA to delegate their procurement authority to USBE and ask USBE to engage or implement the procurement or contract on their behalf. And then the last thing is it does allow USBE to conduct cooperative procurement contracts. Right now, the Division of Purchasing does that, so there might be some product that many LEAs want to take advantage of. So Division of Purchasing does a contract at the state level that then LEAs can choose to participate in. This would allow USBE to also do that, and it would be permissive for the LEA to decide that they would like to engage in that cooperative contract. It's not required. And it also does not eliminate or eliminate the Division of Purchasing's ability to continue to do that. So the Division of Purchasing power to engage in cooperative contracts would remain. And that's the summary of the bill.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Stallings. Any questions on HB 118? Member Vargas.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Stallings. I have lots of questions today, apparently. My first question on HB 118 is, does this expand or grow government? Is this going to give the USBE more power than we presently have, specifically more power over the charter institutions? And then my second question, because they do it in debates, I'm going to do it in board meetings, is why would an LEA delegate that responsibility? I'm just asking for an example that would prove, whether it would be fruitful to have that allocation in there. Is that responsibility that the USBE wants, and what would be the burden on the USBE staff or the USBE, the board itself, should that be included?
So I'll start with if it's all right, Chair, I'll start with your last question first and then go back to the first one. An example of why an LEA might want to request USBE to engage in that procurement on their behalf is because they may not have either legal expertise or they don't have a large or sophisticated procurement support staff to engage in that. And so in lieu of them engaging in the procurement, they might request USBE to engage in that. And it's very similar. We have that for auditing already as well, where in code it says if an LEA wants the State Board of Education to do an audit, almost like that our auditing team were the district or the charter school's internal auditing team, that they can request that. As for the burden, I think that it would depend on how many asked for that support. And I'm not aware, we are not, or at least USBE staff are not asking for additional FTE related to this. I think if it became, my guess is, if it became a demand and many wanted to participate in that, then we might consider whether we asked for an FTE or if there was some sort of maybe charge or contract that would be put in place to help pay for, that service. But right now, I'm not aware of any request for FTE or additional resources. Did that answer that second question?
Yes.
Then the first question I think you asked is this going to expand the state board authority? Absolutely. I mean, it is moving the rulemaking authority from this entity of the 15-member committee to the State Board of Education. And again, these recommendations came from audit committee discussions of many audits. A number of these audits, common thread of the problem, one of the audits was about educational service providers. We had a certain charter school that was audited and some others. But the common thread was either a deficiency or not as strong procurement practices, and if they had stronger procurement practices, that these issues could have been resolved. And I think something that's unique about education, we have billions of dollars going through our office, of course, and you've heard me say the State Board of Education has a constitutional authority of general control and supervision over our districts and charters, and so the recommendation of the committee and the board at that time was that the state board should also have oversight over LEA contracting practices, especially now that so much of our LEAs and USBE are very much engaged in contracting with service providers. We have great contracts. We have great relationships with people who do work on our behalf. I know the districts and charter schools do as well. And part of the key to having a good relationship is to have a strong, clear contract. And so, yes, it would be giving more authority to the State Board of Education than currently is held by another entity under the Division of Purchasing.
Small follow-up, Chair.
Please.
Is the charter system something in this same vein, if you will? Could that be handled by their board instead of our board and our staff?
Well, not all of our charter schools are authorized by the same authorizer, and authorizers don't currently have rulemaking authority, so they do not have the authority to enact law. They can put into their charter agreement certain requirements related to procurement, so I think an authorizer could do that. Practically speaking, I'll just use the State Charter School Board as an example because it's the largest authorizer, but we have school districts who authorize schools, and we have 2 higher education entities that authorize schools. But some of those contracts are 20 years old, and oftentimes there are charter schools that do not want to update the charter agreement, so that is a vehicle. I'm just acknowledging that it is possible, but it would require a lot of individual contract work to do that versus because they do not have law-making authority, rule-making authority. So.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the answer.
Other board members, I'll ask one clarifying question. Other than the assumption of rulemaking authority shifting from the committee to the USBE, is there any involuntary movement of USBE into district or charter procurement, or is that at their request? I'm just looking at lines 556 to 558, which are, if they agree in writing with us, is there an element that is involuntary that I'm overlooking?
Other than the Rulemaking Act portion of the bill, the rest is voluntary, although the False Claims Act would apply to them. But if the bill is amended, which we have discussed with the sponsor potential of changing person to the educational procurement unit so that only the educational procurement unit would be able to file a false claim. So you could say it would be up to that district or charter school to decide to file a false claim. So pretty much everything is voluntary with the exception of the rulemaking.
Okay, thanks. I think we got Member Lear, or is that Member Rio? Member Lear.
I just had some random questions on random bills. Is that an appropriate thing to do? If it's
Regular agenda item. I think this is the perfect time.
Okay, and so if I'm jumping around too much and driving you crazy, you can tell me and I'll stop. Okay, HB 193. This is the SOEP expanding the course load, et cetera, I'm wondering if I'm okay with this as long as the same goes for traditional school students. Can traditional school students take 15 classes if they want to and be able to have that cost covered from somebody, or how does that play out?
So part of the background for this bill was actually because of that, because currently a student, if the LEA, the district or charter school, chooses to, they could allow a student to take multiple online courses, and they may or may not include that student's extra coursework into the membership calculation, or try to generate more than one full WPU. So it's currently districts and charter schools they're not restricted in allowing students to over-enroll or to take more courses. And then some LEAs choose to claim that membership and some don't. If they do choose to claim that membership, in our rule, I believe it says you have to have an intent to graduate. But you wouldn't necessarily need it to enroll in those extra online courses.
Maybe
the SOEP did. I mean, the code, right. This language was only in the code for SOEP.
And I just wanted to make sure we could perhaps change our rule to say if this is good for the SOP students, it should be good for our traditional students. And maybe they shouldn't have to have an intent to graduate early in order to be able to take 1.5. Anyway, okay, thank you. HB 185, this is Pulsipher's bill, and I forget, I didn't even write down the name of it.
public education enrollment options amendment.
Right. Can you go to line 61, and that was, I had a question about what was that saying?
Yeah.
And I get what a home-centered, school-supported enrollment is. It's kind of, it's online instruction that the school supports. So tell me what that's saying.
What I think it is saying is when you have home-centered, school-supported enrollment options, which you could say are online, home. We have many students in our LEAs who fully engage in public education while they're at home or away from the school building.
Carry over
yes.
from
and
COVID.
There were many audits back in the day, and these are the early days of like 2015, 16, 17, where there were questions about whether the way a certain LEA was providing resources to a parent and student, and maybe it was asynchronous, so it wasn't, the student was engaged in online learning and wasn't necessarily having a constant or consistent interaction with the teacher, so it was mostly family, student, and parent directed. And you may remember that there were these questions about, is this really publicly funded homeschooling or is this public schooling at home? My interpretation of what this bill is doing is it's clarifying that if we are auditing schools and it looks like it's parent directed, student directed at home and not necessarily LEA directed, that now this is saying we wouldn't now take their WPU funding away from them. It's saying that they can continue to...
It seems like it's creating two classes and then taking it away in the last few lines, taking away that distinction in the last few lines. Because non-LEA directed, parent directed, student directed is just homeschooling.
Well, and that is the quest. That's the difficult. You just pinpointed the argument of sorts. Is, when students are not inside the building and we're providing access to public education, whether it's through SOEP, there's so many different ways that our LEAs are providing that type of support. I think what this is meant to say is, if it's not our job to then tell them that they can't collect the WPU, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, not philosophically. It makes sense. Your words make sense, but.
And Member Lear, another important distinction in this bill that it addresses up in line 38 is it states that you can take a student that's participating in this home-centered, school-supported enrollment can take one or more courses at home, but then they have to take the rest at the school during that school day. So I don't know if that helps. It is what they put in this bill for kind of the distinction between traditional homeschool.
You can take the student out of the homeschool, but you can't take the homeschool out of the student. It's kind of what it's saying to me. One more.
Sorry, we've got a few things going on here.
Bill number this is, and it doesn't show on the screen.
Bill 185.
HB 185.
185.
Thank you.
And I just have one more, and then I don't want to hog this, but I did have a lot of questions. I just want to say these bills are moving so much right now. I don't want to propose any oppose, but I do want to say HB 125. This is Berkland's retirement amendment that would let retired people come back after 60 days if they only earn half of what they're. I really applaud this effort to try to be creative to help with our teacher shortage, and I know it's going to cost. I know the retirement URS always pushes back against things like this. It's going to cost us. We won't have $2 billion in our rainy day fund anymore. But I just think looking at things like this is so helpful in terms of helping our teacher shortage, and it's unrealistic to push so many very capable teachers out because of retirement rules. Thanks. That's all. Thank
all right,
you for
thank you.
patience.
Thank you, Member Lear. Other random questions about random bills? Let's move on. That sounds like a Letterman segment. Let's, and remind members, you can put in by Tuesday to have items put on the agenda or bring them up here, but we can have questions submitted in advance also to have them answered by staff. So we can move to action items if there are any members who wanted to. Oh, sorry. Real.
Yeah, I do have a question on Senate Bill 55. I'm just trying to understand because from the way that I read this, it adds layers and processes and approvals to instructional materials. Have I gathered that appropriately? Okay. I just have concerns about this from a broad perspective of the red tape and layers we require for public education. I think a lot about how it makes it really difficult for us to innovate in public education when we add a lot of layers and approvals to learning materials and what can be used in the classroom. And so I just didn't know if there was, if the intention was for this bill is to add layers because of uncertainty or lack of trust for our LEAs and our local school boards and educators, or if it was because of something that brought upon this bill, and if you even have that knowledge, and if you know if it's tracking or making any progress that would you see it anytime soon. I know that I think that they're hearing it today, right now, in Education Committee. Yeah. True. Yeah. Oh, after, right. So just from my perspective, it feels like a lot of red tape and layers that are unnecessary for public education.
Deputy Stallings, and some of those may be questions for sponsors, but if you're able.
I mean, I think it's based on parent likely requests for their districts or charter schools to engage more. Like maybe parents have wanted more input and then they haven't. I'm not the sponsor, but based on reading it, I'm guessing it was based on parent feedback where they wanted more involvement or a say in district adoption of certain materials, and that's probably where it's coming from.
Okay. I just see a lot of inequalities in the public ed and private and charter and their freedom and flexibility to be innovative, where we put more red tape on our public schools and it hinders that innovation.
So this may come up for a review, more complete review, and perhaps member comments or action in a subsequent meeting. Let's turn to Member Davis, I think.
I move that we support all of the legislation that we have asked legislators to run for us, minus House Bill 116, and I'd like to speak to the motion.
Is that 16 or 116?
16.
Okay. So that we have the motion in front of us, could you itemize what those are that you're asking the board to move on?
Oh, God. Yeah, now I got to get back to it.
They're in bold, but we need to have it in the record.
HB 17, Utah Professional Practices Advisory Commission Sunset Extension. HB 118, Education False Claims Act. SB 77, Education Scholarship Amendments. HB 189, International Baccalaureate Program Amendments. HB 182, Interventions for Reading Difficulties Program Amendments. HB 193, Online Education Course Amendments.
Is there a second? Second. Discussion from Member Davis and then others to that motion? Yeah.
I quickly tried to go through all these again, and I hope there are no unintended consequences, but I will say that when we move as a body to ask legislators to run legislation for us to fix kinks and problems and here and there, it would behoove us to take a position of support on those bills. I don't love taking lots of positions, I'll be honest. I've said that before, for or against either way. I mean, unless I feel really strongly about something, but in these cases, I think we do need to do that. The only reason I left out 16 is because one of our board members indicated she was working with staff on a potential amendment, and we may not have time today to discuss it before we get kicked out.
Thank you. Any other board member? Yeah, we got 1 minute. I will note that procedurally, when it comes back after authorizing a member, a representative, or senator to work on legislation, we do have the opportunity to look at the final product, weigh in, ask questions. So that's why we're here. We have Member Norton. Is this Member Straight?
Oh, I thought you didn't have time. Do we have time for my comment?
I show 3 minutes. Don't-
I have a
We've
comment
got a
too.
motion.
Okay, I wanted to speak to that real quick.
Please.
Then, so, could we look on House Bill 118, lines 442 through 46? There's been some concern raised in regards to that by an LEA. Yeah, sure, I'll let you go ahead.
We can address any or all, or we can, if there's a motion to divide, we can debate any of them, I think, that are pending with Member Davis's omnibus motion, unless Deputy Superintendent.
I was just going to share or remind Board Member Straight that was the first bill I discussed about procurement. Was there a specific question you had on that one? Because
well, I don't think we have time to flush it out. Could we look at it again next time?
I will just share with you, it is on the House floor, and the sponsor has had it circled, just waiting, based on your feedback. So if you want me to share with him that you'd like him to keep it circled for another week, that we could share that recommendation, if you'd like.
So the motion on the floor is
Can I make a friendly?
approve all of these bills that were read in, but yes, Member Davis?
Can I just change my motion to withhold both of those that our two board members are working on
So 118 and 16 would be
without objection from the board?
without objection. So what would be then on the floor would be, I'm sorry if I'm missing HB or SB, but 17, 77, 189, 182, and 193, I believe.
Correct.
Correct. Any further discussion to that motion? As
I do have
amended?
a comment.
Yes, Member Klein?
Yes, thank you. So when we voted to support staff in working with legislators on these bills, it was based on an idea or a concept that we had in our minds, not necessarily on what the end result was of the creation of that bill. And so I don't believe that we should have to support it or that we should be obligated at all. It was simply a vote to support our staff to work with legislators, not necessarily to support the end result. So I will not be voting for this.
As I noted, that is the procedural opportunity. We approve them moving forward, that we have the opportunity to review the final product and ask questions. So I think we're going to have to postpone. We are up against a one.
Well, can we take a vote on this motion?
Back to the sponsor.
I mean, we don't have to vote yes, you don't have to vote yes or no, but we can't read the changes prior to this meeting, which we did. So let's just vote yes or no. I'm fine with either, but.
Yeah, back to you. Is that conclusion then? But yeah, what's the final question?
So I would just move that we divide the question.
Well.
And I know that we don't have time, but I think voting on these in a big clump is a poor choice at this time.
Let's vote to divide. All in favor? Well, I'm sorry. Did you get a second on that?
I second August's motion.
Or second. We had a motion. I didn't hear a second to divide. So the motion to divide has been seconded. We're going to have one vote, and then we need to get out of here, and potentially two. So the motion to divide is on the floor. Member Bogus, Member Booth, Member Klein.
Yes.
Member Davis. Member Vice Chair Earl. No. Member Green.
Yes.
Vice Chair Hart.
No.
Member Hymas. No. Member Carey. Yes. Member Lear. No. Member Norton. No. Member Reel. No. Member Straight. No. Member Wood. No. Member Moss is no.
Member Booth was no.
Fails. That member fails. So the motion on the floor is that the board support the following bills. Sorry. No. Booth was a no. Okay. Motion on the floor is the board support the following bills that are related to the board's policy requests: HB 17, SB 77, HB 189, HB 182, and HB 193. Member Bogus. No. Member Booth.
Yes.
Member Klein.
No.
Member Davis. Vice Chair Earl.
Yes.
Member Green.
No.
Member Hart?
Yes.
Member Hymus? Member Terry? Member Lear? Member Norton? Member Reel? Member Straight? Member Wood? Member Moss is a yes. Total there. Passes by 11-4. Motion to adjourn has been made. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you all.
No, I think.
All right.
Jordan needed that.
I know.
Right now? Which one? Taylor stuff? Okay.
Well, did I go all right?
Yeah, no, you did great. You did great. We're all running out. Awesome.
Yeah, I'll do I was ready, yeah, I think most of those times is fine.